So thanks, I appreciate it. When I first came in, I had two interesting questions. One was, did you bring glass for everybody? Google Glass. I did not. I did say yes, but I was lying. And actually, I would have brought it, but I figured it would then take over the conversation. And maybe next time we can talk about Google Glass. And the second question I got was, how did they get you? Somebody's very impressed with Jim's magnetic personality that drew me here. And honestly, I was thinking about it. I'm not special. I'm not actually any different than you guys at all. And I think the barometer I use of whether I'm going to talk to a group or tell the story is really whether I would have done it before I was bought by Google, before my company was bought by Google. And I know what it's like to be sitting in that seat giving the pitch. I'm so glad I don't have to pitch right now, and I'm so glad I don't have to wear a suit or look good. I can just wear what I want to wear. So for me, it's actually really important to share the it's my responsibility to share the story of how we ended up at Google, and hopefully it's not my last story, but it's probably the most interesting. So I'll just give you the quick background. I started as a programmer at really in Wall Street at JP Morgan. So I was a computer science graduate, State University of New York at Albany. Very proud of that fact. There's not many of us at Google, but there are some. Great computer science school, but I worked on Wall Street. Like many people in New York are drawn into that, I'll call it the vacuum, because they just pull you in, right? It really is. There's great jobs on Wall Street, and I loved programming, but I was there for a long time. I stayed there for 16 years, and really the whole time everybody that I knew was like, when are you going to do that thing, that startup thing? When are you going to? And so I had a lot of ideas, and I did a lot of small startups part-time, but it wasn't until really I decided that I had some great contacts and I was really ready and started a family and felt like, okay, this is the chance. And I really started a consulting firm first. So I have two startups that were part of what I did, as my exit from Wall Street. It started as consulting. And the important part about that was it bootstrapped the startup that we ended up selling. So we didn't have to necessarily seek funding. We were able to take an idea we had for a product and really fund it ourselves, which is a huge advantage if you can do it. So it's very hard to do, though. You can't always focus on two things. The key to that was having two great partners, one on one side and one on the other. So I'll tell you the story. It's really, I only have a couple of slides that are frankly just guides. But it started with a useful idea. And this started at JP Morgan. It was an idea that really was meant to fill a tremendous hole that was building in spreadsheets, in Excel. And that hole was the complexity of models that bankers were using to share with customers, but they couldn't share the model with customers. So finally the web came along, and people could share the model with customers, but not easily. So I had a team of programmers, and we were responsible for the structured finance department. And when they would come to us with an incredibly complex and very advanced model for, let's say, Argentinian bonds, or a credit default swap, or a CD, a collateralized debt obligation or something, they would say, okay, I have this great model. I need it on the web so that my customers can try scenarios on this model. And we would look at this thing and be like, what does this do? It's going to take us months. And literally, the estimate very often was 6 months to get something that they developed in, call it, 3 to 4, 6 weeks maybe, to just get it on the web so that customers could get to it. Very complex. So somebody that worked with me, he ended up becoming my business partner. His name is Fuzzy, believe it or not. Fuzzy came up with this concept of converting these models that were in Excel to web apps and do it automated. And generally, the concept worked. And the concept was just so incredible in terms of usefulness and ROI that we started using it. But it wasn't direct. So the technology we used and all the methods, it was just the idea that was incredible. The method we used at JP Morgan really wasn't yet. But that idea was the foundation for a company that we spun off called 2Web Technologies. So we both left JP Morgan. I started the consulting firm. He did something else. Then he rejoined, and we said, let's take that idea and do something real with it. And we made this product called Excel to Web. So you could, the tagline was Excel to the web in 60 seconds. And it was true. It wasn't actually 60 seconds was longer than it usually took. And I knew we were onto something big. It was really enterprise software, but I knew we were onto something big when we talked to a trader back at JP Morgan, and he literally, before we told him the pricing, which you should never do, he said, "You just saved my job." Because literally he was telling his management that he could get the stuff on the web. That's how they'll share the stuff with customers, and it was way too complex in the technology he was using. So that was the idea. Now, we had a vision for taking that idea after we were selling it, and I'll tell you, enterprise software, for those of you that are in it, is terrible. It's trying to sell to enterprises is no fun. It's really, really hard, and it's onerous, and they've got these organizations that are the vendor management office that you don't actually talk to the customer. They basically send you off to talk to someone else that doesn't know anything about the value prop that you've got, and it's a slog. It's really hard. That said, we started selling, but we had a vision for what I would just call spreadsheets on the web. Our vision was, why do we need Excel at all? Why can't we build those models on the web? The web is ready. And this was in 2003-ish, 2004-ish. And so the idea of Excel to web, what I just described to you, was actually completely irrelevant to Google. When you think about Google, especially back then, there was no real enterprise play. They had a little bit in search, where they had the search appliance, but nothing really relevant to Google. The key was, if we could make it relevant, or we could make it relevant, if there was someone at Google that shared that vision, spreadsheets on the web. It's a big vision. It was something that really back then sounded like browsers are not ready. And I think we proved beyond a reasonable doubt that they were not ready back then. But they became ready, and we knew it was happening. We certainly needed somebody with a willingness to experiment, somebody that was willing to say, okay, it might not be relevant, but I could, and some deep interest in web apps. And so really, this is, I would say, the advice I give to people just constantly in the startup world, which is the reason this all happened is so easy to point to luck. But what really happened was we created some contacts when we were at JP Morgan. A lot of networking just by virtue of doing business. We met a guy that was at BEA Software who was known as the father of XML in many circles. And he had worked at Microsoft before that, and little did I know, but he had created Quattro, the spreadsheet application. I didn't even know that at the time. And he gave us some advice on architecture, basically telling us that our architecture, when we were at JP Morgan, of that idea was terrible, but the idea was awesome. So we called him back in 2004, and we said, hey, Adam, it's us, blah, blah, blah. Would you mind giving us advice? We need advice on funding, and we need advice on our business model, and just generally architecture. We think we have the right architecture now, but before we go further, we'd love your advice because you gave us great advice back in the day. He said, that's fantastic, but I'm no longer at BEA Software. I'm at Google. So the message there really is to just keep those contacts close. You never know where your next meal is coming from, for lack of a better term. We went to see him at Google, and again, he very clearly said, why are you here? If you're here because you think Google's interested, then you should probably go. But if you're here to talk to me, that's fine. And we said, no, we're here to talk to you. We definitely need your advice. Thrilled to be able to set foot in the Google offices. And back then, the Google office was not actually that impressive in New York. It was very small. But he also, by chance, still happened to work part-time in New York. So we showed him something, sort of advice number 2, have something, right? We showed him our original product, and that was impressive, and he gave us some advice, but he said, but what are you really thinking? And we said, we are thinking spreadsheets on the web. That's something that we understand you wouldn't be interested in the other thing, but spreadsheets on the web, he said, show me, and we showed him a prototype that literally Fuzzy, my partner in crime here, built 2 days before. It was just a simplistic front end on a very powerful back end that we already had. So we had the back end stuff, the stuff that was working, but no front end. And he built it and created it and made it work just enough. And when Adam saw that, he pulled the machine away from us and started typing what I couldn't believe was an incredibly complex formula that we thought we were the only ones that could do out of the top of our heads. Little did we know he created Quattro, so he knew this stuff too. And he said, wow, it works, like this spreadsheet on the web. In the browser, it was a simple spreadsheet, but a very complex formula. He said, it works. And we're like, yeah, well, of course it works. That's our product. And he said, I changed my mind. Google's interested in this. And we were just in complete shock. And he immediately went into sell mode. And he started saying, so what do you guys think about the startup world? How do you like it? What's your goal? Do you want fame, fun, fortune? We had a whole model for me about, and he started drawing on the board, and it was incredible because we realized suddenly, both of us, without doing any more than looking at each other, that he was selling us. He was suddenly, desiring the product. So we left there high-fiving and literally blown away by the fact that there was any interest. 6 months later, we were bought. And that's sort of how it all happened. This is a very, very brief history of what happened from there. So that was what became the Google Spreadsheets product. So we were acquired in mid-2005. We started talking to them in 2004. I still have my badge from that day. It's really fun to look at that. But in 2005, we were acquired mid-year. And literally about a year later, we launched. So that first launch was Google Spreadsheets in Labs. Does anybody remember that? Did anybody use that? We've got a couple of fans that actually have used it since then. Actually, back then they hated us, and because it was a painful product, but it was still quite different, right? It was something that was very different, actually. In the middle there, we also acquired Rightly. So we didn't have a web product when they bought us. We went there and built it. And so the first Spreadsheets product, we had the back end, but not the front end. So we had to build the front end, and that was not so easy. That was actually quite hard. In the meantime, Rightly launched publicly as a public company, and of course, they didn't even know we were doing this. This was completely stealth for that whole year, but as soon as we launched, everybody knew. But before that, we said, wow, this is something that we're going to want to go to the next step. We could tell by using this product internally it was something interesting, and we went out and bought Rightly. We acquired Rightly, saying, okay, we're going to need a word processing component. The architectures are very different, but they were also a very small team. They were based in California, we were based in New York, but we just kind of bit the bullet and said, let's combine these two teams and make the product more whole. So we launched Google Spreadsheets. Then later we launched Google Docs and Spreadsheets, by far the best named product ever on the web. Because what else could it be but Docs and Spreadsheets? And that's when we took the product out of labs and we really started becoming serious about a web-based productivity app. And again, very, I would say, under the radar, almost to laugh at by Microsoft, but something that was starting to show what was coming. Just like Gmail when it launched in 2004 was starting to show what was happening. And then in 2007, we launched Google Apps for Business, which put us in a different place. So Google Docs and Spreadsheets became part of a much larger suite, and immediately everybody said, because consumers wouldn't say this, people started saying, what about presentations? When are you going to make that name of that product, Google Docs and Spreadsheets and Presentations? That would have been a great name. So we started working on that. We actually initially weren't sure we were going to do it, and if we didn't package this product for businesses, ultimately we probably wouldn't have done it. I would say we would have stuck with the things that were more close to consumers' hearts, but we went after that and started that product as well. We acquired a couple of other small companies, very small companies, mostly for talent, incredible people, but two-person companies twice we did for people in the presentation space. And so that was back in 2007. But I think that was, probably the start of a trajectory for us that hasn't stopped. Since then, it's basically robustness, features. Of course, mobile came along in the middle of that. Something that we had to really turn on a dime and make a big investment in. Somebody asked native or web-based. We started web-based. No good. We went to native. So now we have teams that are working on iOS native and Android native and web. So we basically have, we've tripled up in a lot of cases. So a couple of things that I just wanted to mention related to the startup part of this. The luck side, of course, there's luck there, but that luck, you can control a good deal of that, which is through opportunity. You can create opportunities for yourself. This is perfect. This is a perfect example of that, right? There's an opportunity in this room for you, or in the next meetup, or in the next one, right? There's an opportunity with every customer. Funding, obviously, for us was easy, but it's not so easy. And thinking about that up front is so critical. Thinking about why you're looking for money, what you're going to do with it, what's the return on that investment going to be. The responsibility you take on when you take money from someone changes everything, even if it's friends and family, right? I think I'd rather live with the letting down a VC than the guilt of taking somebody's money that I know and love. But usually the friends and family money is easier because they're not looking to control your business. But that said, there's a lot of good funding opportunities out there, and not the least of which now are some of the the self-funding methods, right? The Kickstarters of the world, and there's plenty of those now. I would say for us, the key turning point was our first customer. We never would have had that opportunity with Google until we got, for us, Deutsche Bank. It was our first customer. Is it the right customer for what we ended up doing? Not at all. But if we didn't have that customer, we wouldn't have set a direction and a path that gave us the income and the revenue and the ability to hire people and things like that. And that's critical. And that first customer, I probably, in hindsight, should have given the product away for free. Because it was only the fact that we had Deutsche Bank and their name and their reference that gave us the other customers. And the reference is so critical. When somebody says, well, who are your customers? You have to be able to say, here they are, and here's how many, and here's their, what they say about our business. And it is worth, I think, giving the product away. Partners, and I say twice, I think that's really important. First, internal partner, right? For me, it was my business partner that was the technology side of our, partnership. I ended up being the business guy. And it was critical that he and I could work well together and knew each other's, positives and negatives and skills and deficiencies. That was critical. And I would say, I say twice because sometimes those partnerships also, once you're in business, come with external partners, people that you can partner with that are meeting a deficiency that you might have in your business or doing something that, you've got a mutual benefit by partnering rather than just buying from. So like you're saying, even white labeling, things like that, you end up with somebody that's a much closer partner that's willing to put some money on the table because they think your label's going to go crazy. Pivoting, I think, is critical. If you look at our business, we pivoted from enterprise to consumer. It was actually quite hard. It wasn't easy. It was really hard. But I could see that happening in some businesses and changing the world for them. You think you're in one business and you can just take one little move to the left and be in a different business, and that's what causes success. And I think it's important to recognize it and to make those hard decisions. Those decisions are probably the hardest you'll ever make. And the team is an asset. Everybody that you add to your team is either an asset or a detriment. One of the most self-aware moments for me was our interviews at Google. And our team had to go to Google and interview. And as I realized that they wanted to interview everybody on the team, I could see in my sights, okay, problem, benefit, problem, benefit, benefit. Not because the person was necessarily wrong for our company, but it wasn't going to be something that Google cared about. And so we ended up with 4 people going to Google. It was a very small team, and only 3 of us worked on the product. One of them actually did something completely different. So that team, I think, is critical, and you have to really watch that and pay attention. And then startup versus large company, just a very quick couple of points. I think for us it was we joke about it now because when we look in hindsight, it was a great decision for us to go to Google. But we did think about it. We actually did think, wow, we love the startup world. We love small company, running it ourselves, not commuting to the city necessarily every day. But I think some of the things that I look at now to say, did it make sense, was first of all, is there some kind of vision that your product will become a part of? And does it fit? Does it actually fit? Or are they looking to really just, we just want the team? And you have to make a decision, is it worth it or not? Is there consistency across products? Whether it fits or not might make it more consistent. Is there strong support? Will you actually have sales support, marketing support? For us, it was infrastructure support. We had literally only one person was added to our team on the engineering side when we first launched. It was only literally 4 of us when we launched. But ultimately, with success, brought larger team and more support. The internal sponsor, ask that question. Have you got an internal sponsor? If you don't, and we actually joined, it's an interesting, I would say, difference between another company that joined right when we did. Who here has heard of Foursquare? Foursquare was originally Dodgeball. Does anybody remember Dodgeball? The 2 founders of Dodgeball joined very close to when we joined. They didn't really have an internal sponsor. But the product was incredible, and they slowly but surely really just, I think, lost an opportunity in the space because their vision wasn't being supported. They had a vision for that product. In hindsight, it was an amazing vision when you look at the success of Foursquare. But Dodgeball within Google didn't have a sponsor, and we were just discovering mobile at that time. We had a mobile team. That's how just discovering we were. It wasn't embedded in every team. So very interesting difference. And can you stay passionate about the product? For me, that's what's kept me there for so long. I mean, of course, the food also. But I am still so passionate about what we're doing, and I really believe, we are the future of productivity, and that's what we're developing. And we're going up against, a Goliath. I think, in this space, and we think we can win. We think we've got a great product that can keep moving, but we've got so much to do. So I feel like I'm still passionate about it, and that's what's kept me there. So that's the story of how Excel2Web became Google Docs. It's been a fairly long road. So when you look at it, I'm coming up on my 8th anniversary there, 7th anniversary of launching the product, the Google Spreadsheets product. But it's been a really interesting road, and I wouldn't trade it in the world for anything. So thank you. If we have time for questions, yeah. Questions, if you've got questions.
Anybody questions and answers?
So you mentioned team. How do you know you've got the right person on the team? Besides the obvious good partner that you had, but as you recruit people in the
I would say you have to mix the two things, the skills and do you want to work with this person? We've got, I really believe that the skills are so critical, obviously. If you're filling a role, I think you have to ask yourself, are you happy to see this person every day in the office? Can you relate to them? Do you like being with them? And I think that that's sometimes put a little bit aside because you're desperate for someone, and that does happen. But there are methods to try to make that happen. There was one guy on our team that we hired, critical technical role. We did not have a lot of money, and it was before we were really ready to launch and had our first customer, but we really needed somebody more technical than we were in a specific area, and somebody that could do almost anything. And so we met this guy, very young, and he interviewed terribly. So I went to my partner on the consulting side and said, listen, and she always helped us with hiring. I said, I really want to hire this guy because we need him. He's got the right skills, but I don't know long term. So we wrote up basically, we will hire you for 3 months, probationary. We think you're a great fit. We're not sure we'll be in business. We're not sure this. We're not sure that. And it's risky because the person will be like, forget it. But he was very interested. And after a month, we were so glad we hired him. We gave him a permanent offer. And ironically, he's the third guy that came to Google. And when we got hired at Google, he had the same exact problem. And Google said, we're not going to hire him. And we said, no, you are, because we're not coming if he doesn't come with us. And we know the problem you're having in the interview because we had the same problem. And believe me, after a month, you're going to hire him. And certainly, after a month or 2 months maybe, we hired him full time. And now he's a senior staff engineer. He's one of the most senior guys on our team. He's an incredible architect. He's responsible for so much of our success and so much of the technology infrastructure behind Google Docs, which is, at this point, very different than the rest of the marketplace. So I think it's, and ultimately we liked working with him. He's an incredible person. And so I think that's key, and the skills are key. And I think the other thing is, if things change, will this person be able to change? Are they flexible? And that's one of the things we do at Google that's very unique, which I would say if you can do in your business, if you have the opportunity, hire people that are not coming in for one specific role only, that you could imagine them in other roles. And for a startup, that means, literally from sales to marketing to customer support. At Google, it's more like, no, can they be a product manager on any product? And then, yes, which product do we want to put them on?
In light of the Tumblr acquisition, what's your perspective on the chances for success, knowing when a small company gets bought by a large company, when a former Google employee is now the CEO of Yahoo, what you might forecast?
For what? What do you?
Then Tumblr being able to flourish.
Oh, for Tumblr.
For Tumblr.
Oh, specifically.
And Yahoo,
yeah.
Leveraging it.
I mean, that's interesting. Yeah, sure. What do I believe will be the chances of success for a company like Tumblr? We'll use that as an example maybe, in a company like Yahoo, and particularly their ability to thrive. Maybe we could look back and look at Flickr as the example, especially in Yahoo, which is, who knows? I can't see inside necessarily. I know people that have been there, but I think the key is now there's and this is a Yahoo knowing Marissa, there's a tremendous amount of focus. So they're not buying Tumblr as like, oh, they've got something we need, page views, let's go after them. There's a lot deeper acquisition discussion about what the future of that product is, but only they know whether they'll actually want it to thrive as a separate thing or whether they'll pull it into Yahoo and make it the Yahoo Tumblr product, whatever that is. But I think one way or the other, they've got a strategy. Marissa's not doing this as, hey, let's try this. No way. So, yeah.
In terms of structured partnerships,
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, structuring the partnership was the question, the challenge of structuring a partnership. So this is where the brilliance of my first partner came in. On the consulting side, I was partners with a woman named Sue Kirchhoff, and Sue has everything I don't have in terms of discipline and, I think I'll just call it, it's mostly discipline, but I'll call it like all of the detail orientation. She'll get every detail done, whereas when I can see the detail that has to be done, I'm done. I'm like, oh yeah, I can see what needs to get done. Let me move on to the next thing. And she was very specific about putting together an operating agreement with a lawyer to the nth degree, between even she and I. And we were like best friends. And so, but I saw the brilliance in that was that you don't know. You don't know what's going to happen. She might, pass on her side of the business to someone that I don't like working with or that I don't know, or who knows. And then when we did it for 2Web Technologies, luckily we did the same thing under her guise. It's like, whatever, just take care of it. And me and Fuzzy, same thing, best friends, but let's just do it right. Let's make sure it was right. And we had a very clean and crystal clear view in writing of what would happen if we got sold. And I'll never forget when that came true. We looked at each other like, oh my God, this actually was worth, A, the legal money, which looked like no way was it worth it when we paid it, right? That bill was one of the hardest to pay. And B, it was actually quite a good structure. It was incentivizing even me in my ownership to sell the business, to make sure we got to a partner that made sense. So it was, I had to drive that deal, and it was worth it. It was I was incentivized to do it, and it was good for all my partners. So but I would say do it with a lawyer, or at least with a template, but have an operating agreement. Don't do it as like just a handshake. Don't. I would never do that.
I don't know all about the apps or the APIs this year. Are there anything new in the API area that you guys announced?
Oh yeah, there's a ton. I mean, just go to the Google I/O site. There's so much. The question was Google I/O. Was there docs and Drive? Yeah, we didn't do that much in terms of consumer announcement. Last year was our big announcement of Drive when we split Drive off. This year we focused on APIs and mostly around AppScript. I ran into someone, where are you, that knows somebody on the AppScript team. Oh, there you are. Sorry, I forgot your name. But it was so funny. The first person I walked in, he's like, oh, do you know Corey? I'm like, yeah, Corey works on our team. He's actually part of the AppScript team. So AppScript was something we announced a lot of changes to. The Drive SDK was a big part of what we did. But on the consumer side, we didn't announce much. Very small changes and things that, we can't let Google I/O drive all of our announcements, but it is tempting. But there were a lot of great announcements there. It was a great show. Yeah.
Most companies, when they're growing, grow pretty comfortably up to a certain point. That's generally when you start having to add layers. Did you run into it? At what point did you run into it? And how did you handle it?
So the question is, most companies, when they grow, need to add structure, basically layers, but structure. Do you mean at Google or before?
Before.
Before we had no structure. No, we weren't big enough. We weren't big enough. In my consulting company, we grew to about 30, 35 people. And because of the nature of that business, we didn't necessarily need local managers or anything. And me and my partner were so deeply involved. We'd go to client sites. We'd actually participate in jobs. And so we didn't have any structure. And on 2Web Technologies, we didn't grow beyond 8 people. And it was literally just hands-on, let's get this product out the door. Let's change the product. Let's pivot. Let's try something else. So we didn't. At Google, yes, I watched Google go from too flat to structured, but not too structured. And that was actually quite important because of careers and people's, real needs beyond just, coding.
What was the transition for you from large company, JP, small company, back to large company?
Yeah, that's so what was the transition from large company, which I told you I worked at JP Morgan, to small company, which was our own, starting with 0, and back to large. I was fearful of going back to large. I did not want to do it. I told my wife, I told everyone, I will not do it. I will not go to a large company. And then Google came calling. I was like, remember I said I would not do that? How large are they again? And I changed my mind. And frankly, not without due diligence, though. I spoke to a lot of people there. Got very comfortable with the lack of structure, in fact. Ironically, given the last question, I was happy with the fact that it was very flat. I didn't focus on my career entry there. I focused on just what job I'm going to be doing, which in hindsight I probably could have done more for myself, but I was thinking more about the product. Will it be successful? But it was hard in concept. It wasn't hard, I think, only because it was Google. Not that there wouldn't be other companies like that. I think there are plenty of other companies that would be incredible to work for, large companies. But do your homework and understand what it's going to be like day in and day out there. And like I said, the food is unbeatable. So, but it's been fine. Yeah.
I heard that Google does a visioning technique that you pre-write a press release.
So do we pre-write press releases as a visioning technique? We've done that on our team. It's not a Google thing. It's just, I've seen other teams do it. I think we stole it from others if we do it. But I think individually teams love to do that. It's a great technique. I think it really is fabulous, especially if it's, more than a year out. And you can have a vision to say, what do we want the press to say in a year? It's a great idea. Really great idea. I'd love to see Pinks and Greens have that. What do we want to be? And you want to be bought by guilt, not dicks.
Can you say a little bit more about the challenges from mobile environment?
Yeah, mobile for us was incredibly difficult because of what I mentioned. There was the move to mobile came on, fairly slow at first, but then with, like gangbusters. And in our app, I think we always looked at it like a lot of you might even think of it, which is, who is going to edit a document on a phone? Like, is that really necessary? And I think what happened to us was tablets. So tablets came along and changed the form factor enough where it became immediately obvious that mobile was not about phones. And even on phones, we had a baseline capability that we thought we needed, which was have your stuff, at least to view, have your stuff to share. I honestly, this really happened. I'm in the hallway on the 10th floor of our building in New York, and I run into Sergey Brin, one of the co-founders of Google. He's like, I'm having a problem sharing a file. And I'm like, oh my God, I can't. And I swear this was something we were working on but wasn't done. And I'm like, we're about to launch that. It might work now because, he's on the, and I'm trying to give like all the caveats to why it might work for him, but it won't work for like his mom. It's like a disaster. And of course, I walked away there luckily with my job, but it was something that I think gave us the realization that people really are walking around with their stuff. They really do want to be mobile in the sense of the person, not the device. And that is so critical. And so we launched on the web, and browsers on mobile devices were terrible, even on Android. It was just, before we had Chrome on Android, it just wasn't good enough. So we had yet another platform because even though it was browser, it wasn't the browser. It wasn't Chrome. And so we decided about 2.5 years ago now, all in on mobile native. And we hired an iOS team, we hired, got more Android people, really went crazy. And it paid off. It's been really good for us.
What's your view of Google and where it's going?
Oh boy, that's a tough one. I am super optimistic, I have to say. I don't know how, but we have so many paths of success right now. And I honestly, when people ask me like, how did that work? I will only go back to one thing. And I believe, and my forecast for the future is positive only because I've seen it work, even in light of such skepticism, even internally for me. It goes back to the hiring process. I think that we hire so many good people and so many people that culturally fit with each other. We like to work together. We like to solve hard problems. We don't back down from negative feedback. We just fix problems and we face up to it. And everybody's got that same attitude of trying to achieve really large things that so far, so good. There's, I never would have, in 2005 when I joined, never would have predicted Chrome, no less Android success. Chrome OS, Chromebooks in general. There are so many things that are working. I just feel like the future is very positive, and we've got an incredible infrastructure to support a lot of these things.
What things interest you the most?
I have to say, for me, it's the platforms. I really dig platforms, and I think Chrome OS, Chrome as a platform, then Chrome OS, which is Chromebooks. Has anybody here ever used a Chromebook? So a few of you. Chromebook is basically a machine you open up, it boots up in 8 seconds, and it has, it doesn't need a hard drive. It does need a hard drive, really, but it doesn't need a big hard drive, and everything is cloud-based, basically. So people will say, yeah, but what do I do with my Office files? You know, you put those in the cloud too, and you use Docs, of course. So, but that, for me, it's Chrome OS, Chromebooks, Android, and even Drive. Drive is a platform. If you've never used a third-party app on Drive, on Google Drive, well, first, if you've never used Google Drive, go use it. And if you've never used a third-party app on Google Drive, try that. Under the Create button, basically get more apps. There are apps that just basically hook into it. And for me, the old operating system is dead. It's completely dead. It's not going to take a while, but it's dead.
How long do you see it before Chrome and Android just merge?
I have no idea. It's a great question, and we've had, I don't know if they will, frankly. I don't know. I mean, Chrome on Android makes sense, but I don't know if the two will merge. One is an open source, very specific mobile platform or device platform, and one is, it's open source on the Chromium side, but it's a browser. It's hard to say if the two should merge. I love the idea that we have two plays in the platform space, but I'm not convinced they will. And it's so funny, every Googler, especially Larry and Sergey, get asked that question all the time.
You started out with Google Docs based on the company that was acquired, and now you're in products. So what do you oversee? Do you continue you're the chief Google Doc guy, or are you into Google Glass? Are you into some of this other stuff?
Yeah, I don't actually work at Google. No, I'm only kidding. That would be kind of funny. Jim would suddenly get like, what the... I oversee on the product side, so I'm the product management director for Google Docs, AppScript, web fonts, a few other things. Google Drive was under me until literally a couple of months ago. We took someone on my team, promoted him, and he and I are now peers. So Google Drive and Google Docs have such different futures that they're so tied that we thought it would be best if we let the two teams have their own identity, and so we did that recently. It's all still based in New York. And Quick Office, I don't know if you know Quick Office, we recently acquired, I say recently, fairly loosely, a year ago we acquired Quick Office, which is a mobile productivity app, and that's also in my group. So that changed the scope of my team a bit, and we decided let's break out Docs and Drive a bit, but we still have a lot of other small things. So, yeah.
How's the penetration of the enterprise?
It's fantastic. It's not something I can talk about numbers necessarily. I should have thought about public numbers. But for us, enterprise is much broader than just large company. So we have a tremendous number of companies over, let's call it 1,000 employees, or I think we drew the line at 3,000. A lot of real enterprises. So recently, I think some of the public ones are Kohl's, Costco, some of the retail guys, Delta Hotels. There's a lot of very large ones. Woolworths in Australia is massive. And then we've got other segments that we consider internally part of, quote, enterprise. In other words, it's organizationally put together. And education is part of that. And education is a massive segment for us. I think we just announced there's like 25 million students on Google Apps. And the whole country of Malaysia just signed up, like literally. And there's a lot of that. And I know, it's insane. Try selling to Malaysia, I know. But it's really incredible the success we've had. Again, in light of who we are and where we came from, that wasn't necessarily something we would have seen in 2007 when it was launched. But we've really kept at it, and it's something that we're very serious about. We, as Google, use it, day in and day out. There's no reason other large public companies couldn't use it. So yeah, there was one in the back. Sorry, I've been.
Yeah, on Google Drive, fellow Islander, by the way.
Oh, all right.
Google Drive, are any plans on getting it onto a Linux platform?
I'm just laughing because I swear, no matter what we say about our product, somebody comments and then 100 people join and say, "Drive for Linux," and they start like a revolution. So I can't really say whether there is or there isn't, but Yeah, exactly. So you probably look forward to it at some point. Yeah, it's hard to. Yeah.
Do you see browser-based documents and spreadsheets becoming the default majority of people? And if yes, which I'm assuming you do, how long do you think that'll take in the United States? Is that 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? What do you think it'll take for that shift to happen?
I would say, did you say for that shift to happen?
Yeah.
I thought you said something. Didn't it sound like you said something else? Exactly. I would say I really do believe it could be 2 years, but not the majority. I think what we've found is that the habits of people are so deep, and they won't do it until their machine dies. And when their machine dies, they're not going to go buy another machine like the one they had. That's my view. And I think that's what we're seeing. If you look on Amazon and look up laptops, the #1 selling laptop on Amazon, I think they said now for the last 9 months, is a Chromebook, a $250 Samsung Chromebook. The #1 selling laptop. You can't get Office on a Chromebook. So I do believe it's going to happen. And the reason I say that more confidently, too, is I see what happens in enterprises that use our products. They're just dying to move everything over. And our view is you can probably move 80% over day one. It's just that the last 20%, some of those will always be, I'll call them Photoshop users or Office users. They're the specialists. They're the people that need very, very deep, robust apps on a very specific platform. But most people don't.
There will always be a need for a small segment to have.
I think so, yeah. I think a very small segment.
We have just one or
But
two
yeah.
more questions.
What's your view of security in the future on the web? Because everything's there. That's
Yeah.
where we are, right?
Yeah, I think, the security future has started. We used to get, in enterprise particularly, tremendous numbers of questions before the decision. Now we get much more after the decision because there's a lot of confidence and there's a lot in place. There's a lot of, very specific certifications that we go through for enterprise. I don't think we have HIPAA yet, which is a huge one, but we have others. And so regulated industries, I think, will take a while. But I think the main thing that's going to happen is we have encryption over the wire now. I think encryption at rest will be the next thing because not everything's encrypted at rest. For us, there's so many other things that protect data. And, I keep everything. I would say the one advice I do give people is when you're using web-based services that have private data in it, set up two-step authentication. Make sure you have an account that when somebody else tries to log in. Do not, and that's so I have it set up so if somebody tries to log into my account from another machine besides mine that I trusted for 30 days at a time, I get a phone call that says, "Oh, here's a code." It'd be like, "Code? I didn't try to log in." But if it's me and I tried to use that machine, I would just enter the code, no problem. And that alone, I think, is a huge barrier. But I think it's mostly about the person understanding, people understanding security, and that's a really hard bridge to cross when individuals, are more, I think, apt to do things they can remember, and it's just easier, the path of least resistance. So, but I think we're on our way to something that's, fairly understood. We're so far along.
Last two.
You talked about that you, by default, became the business part of your
Yeah.
partnership, and your partner became the tech person. How important would you say the business lead to be tech savvy?
So I'm biased. So I think if it's a tech product, very important. If it's not a tech product, not important at all. I think you can hire somebody that can handle the tech side of your business if you're in a different industry. But if your industry is tech, you should understand your industry. You should know what you're doing and whether your products are complex or simple.
I was asking the question based on the other major tech company, Macintosh, the business guy and the tech guy, and the business guy actually ended up taking the lead.
Yeah.
And really made Apple what it is today.
Yeah. Ironically, so he wasn't a tech guy, is what you're saying? Yeah. So ironically, he also wasn't selling tech. That's what's so amazing about him. He was selling, I don't know what to call it, but experience. Yeah. Humanity. He's just, just an amazing difference. I would never give somebody, I think, the advice based on the Steve Jobs path. He was just an amazing, anomaly, frankly.
To some extent, Bill Gates and
Yeah.
Paul Allen.
But they were,
Gates
yeah,
became-
right.
even though
But
he
Paul
was
Allen,
tech,
right, exactly.
Paul Allen
He
was a
became
lot
the-
more tech, and Bill Gates
Yeah.
was a lot more
And ironically, so, I had the tech degree. My partner, who ended up the better coder, did not. He didn't have a tech degree. He was self-taught. And he's an engineering director at Google. He's got an amazing role. So.
Last one, Jim.
So regarding platforms, for folks developing apps, is HTML5 going away and more native stuff, or what's the future of
No. It's interesting. I think if you're, it's worth trying an HTML5 app that works on mobile so that if people hit your app from their mobile browser, it works. That's really smart. We're getting traffic to our mobile product, which is frankly a little broken, that shocks us. There's a lot of people now using their mobile browser to get to apps, so you want that to work. But if you expect mobile to be a big component of your product and you want the experience to be really strong, go with native, at least for now. You know, I hope it doesn't last. The fact that we're back to multi-platform really bothers me and bothers everybody that's in tech, because we were on our way out of that. HTML5 looked like, but HTML5 is not going away. It's awesome for web-based experience, really incredible. You can strip away thousands of lines of code from what you had before. And it's, you know, it's a little bit more of a programming language than it was with CSS 3, and there's a lot there. So I would follow that closely. And yeah, so that's it. Good.
Thank you very much.